Imagine a world where there was only one type of fish species, one type of fishing method, and one type of fishing land. It probably would be a really boring sport, and there would be no culture around it and no learning curve when it comes to fishing. But good thing for us recreational fishermen, that's not the case. Our planet is filled with over 30,000 different fish species, like catfish, carp, bass, and whatever this thing is. The beauty of fishing is how different it is around the world. Today, I will be talking about how geographical differences affect fish and the fishing culture, so a normal recreational fisherman like you can have more knowledge about different cultures and places, and why it's useful knowledge.
Those mother truckers. Nobody likes carp. They're a stupid species of fish.
If you've been fishing for some time now, you've probably caught one of these. I know I sure have. And they're a lot of fun to catch, and they fight really hard. This is the common carp, a fish known to every single continent of the world except Antarctica. Depending on where you live, you might love and cherish this fish, or you might want to kill it with herpes. Seriously, the Australian government is genuinely considering controlling their carp population with a herpes virus that kills them. It's insane. Even if you're not trying to kill them with diseases, you most likely don't like them in general. Although common carp have been mostly naturalized in America, many recreational fishermen would rather throw these fish on the bank to die and be food for the hawks instead of throwing them back. There are good reasons for this too. Carp and their feeding habits are very bad for the water quality. When they feed, they stir up the bottom dirt layer and bring up all this crap in the water, making previously clear water muddy and murky. Not only that, carp do not have many natural predators. These carp lay up to 1 million eggs a spawn, and combining those two traits, they can overpopulate fisheries very quickly and aggressively, which is really bad for native species in bodies of water. Okay, so then why not just catch them and eat them all? Good question. The reason why we don't really do that is carp is not a very good tasting fish compared to native species. These fish are bottom feeders, and they have these really annoying Y bones in their meat that makes it pretty much impossible to boneless fillet them. So because they're hard to fillet and have a gamey taste from their feeding habits, they're really not eaten much in the US. But that's enough carp slander. Let's take a trip to the other side of the world, China. Chinese people have pretty much the opposite mindset when it comes to carp. It's a very large food source in China, and they're very commonly aquafarmed and are even seen as symbols of prosperity and strength. They're a high source of protein and are a staple food on the dinner table. So, why do these people love carp so much, but some places hate them to the core of their beings? Well, I don't have a 100% answer to that. I'm just the messenger of information. I don't have all the answers. But it is very interesting how these geographical differences affect carp culture. Finally, we're done talking about carp. Now we can move on to... Actually, no, we still have to talk about carp. Just not common carp. See, there are more species of carp, and these species are debatably worse than common carp. These carp, specifically silver, grass, bighead, and black carp, are becoming a bigger and bigger issue in America. And as they spread around the country, they multiply and destroy habitats. I mean, just look at what these fish do to the environment.
Getting wet. Oh, there we go. There's some good hang.
I mean, look at that. Who the heck wants to go fishing when you run the risk of your jaw getting broken by a carp? And not only that, they've been identified in my own county.
To western Wisconsin now, authorities have detected an invasive species in portions of the lower Chippewa and Black rivers.
Moral of the story is, please keep your native species where they belong. And now we're done talking about carp. What a relief. So we talked a bit about fishing culture. Let's talk about fish species, and I'll use trout for my example. If you live in the US, you probably know about the native trout here, rainbows, browns, and brookies. But have you ever heard of a yamame trout? These are trout native to Japan, and rainbow trout are actually invasive in Japan, which is just crazy to think about. We always think about species that the other side of the world brought here, but not species we brought there. Over in Japan, they love to fly fish for trout just like we do, But have you ever heard of tenkara? It's a Japanese fly fishing method that uses a very long rod that doesn't even have a reel seat. The line is just on there, almost like a cane pole. Tenkara is becoming a bigger thing here in the US, and seeing different cultures meddle with each other's fishing methods is just so cool. So, it's no secret that the southern states are a lot warmer than the northern states. I mean, you didn't need me to tell you that, but now think about how that affects the fish and their lifestyle. Up here in Wisconsin, when wintertime comes around, everything freezes. Lakes, rivers, my car door handle, everything. So when wintertime comes around, bass are not really eating too much, not compared to how much they eat in the summertime. So evidently, these fish grow a lot less in the winter. But if we take a trip down to, say, Florida, it is rarely cold, and if it is, it won't be cold enough to freeze over the water. So the bass that live there are eating good 365 days a year. So it's no surprise when you find out that Florida bass are a heck of a lot bigger than Wisconsin bass, on average. Let's take a look at the state records of bass for each. That's a 6-pound difference. So think about it this way. Geographical differences do affect fish, and a good reason for that is climate. I mean, tropical fish are going to be where it's tropical, and fish that like cold water are going to be where it's cold. This can be applied to pretty much everywhere around the world, and climate is a big factor in what kind of fish you are catching where you live.
Picking Neptune's bucket!
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about cold, hard flipping cash!
So let's talk about something entirely different. Let's talk about money. GDP is a pretty good way to see how much money a country makes, and looking at the contribution that fishing puts into GDP shows what that country's fishing culture is like. I'll start here in the US. The US has a total GDP of around $27 trillion, but the contribution to that from fishing is only about 0.005%. China has a total GDP of about $18 trillion, but the contribution to that from fishing is about 7.3%. The Solomon Islands has a total GDP of about $1.63 billion, but the contribution to that from fishing is about 18%. So, if we take a closer look, the US makes the most total money, but their fishing economy is minuscule compared to the total. China also has a very large GDP, and their contribution is much higher than the US, which shows that China's aquafarming and fishing economy is much larger than the US. But if we look at the Solomon Islands here, their GDP is not even close to these countries, but their fishing is about a fifth of their entire economy. This shows how big a country's culture around fishing is. Yes, fishing is a big thing here in the US, but compared to a place like the Solomon Islands, it's not even close. Yes, population and location create a big factor in these values, and that's the point. Depending on where you live and how big your country is, fishing could be your life, or it could be a small part of your country. So, why does any of this matter anyway? Well, I believe it is important to know what your country's culture is around fishing, and why the fish you love to catch there are there in the first place. As recreational fishermen and a part of the fishing culture, we should know how we contribute to that culture. Do we add onto the already established culture, or do we bring something new to the culture? And we should learn about other cultures, because they always have a species of fish or a method that we have never used or seen, and we should share it with each other. Whether it's the kind of fish you catch, the way you catch that fish, to even how you cook and prepare that fish, depends on where you live. Next time you go out fishing, take a second and think to yourself, if I was living in another country, how would this trip be different? And how would it be similar? It's never a bad thing to think about. Well, that's all I have. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope I informed you well on how geographical differences affect fish and fishing cultures.